There is a side of human nature that most people refuse to talk about. Not because it is rare, but because it is uncomfortable to accept. We like to believe that people are naturally good, emotionally honest, and internally consistent. We want to trust that intentions are pure, words are meaningful, and relationships are stable. But deep within human psychology, there exists a darker layer that silently influences behavior, decisions, and relationships every single day. A layer that does not always show itself directly, but always exists beneath the surface. And once you understand it, you will never see people, or even yourself, the same way again. Because the truth is simple yet unsettling. Humans are not as predictable, rational, or emotionally stable as we like to believe. Stay with this until the end, because what you discover here might completely change how you interpret human behavior forever. Human nature is not purely logical. It is deeply emotional, reactive, and often driven by internal survival mechanisms rather than conscious choice. One of the darkest truths about human behavior is that people do not always act based on what is right. They often act based on what protects their ego, emotions, or identity in the moment. The ego is not just pride or arrogance. It is a psychological defense system designed to protect how we see ourselves. When a person feels threatened emotionally, socially, or mentally, the ego steps in to distort truth, justify behavior, or reject accountability. This is why people lie, avoid responsibility, or even hurt others without fully processing the emotional consequences. It is not always evil intention. It is often unconscious self-protection disguised as normal behavior. Another uncomfortable reality of human nature is emotional dependency. Humans are not as independent as they appear. Much of what we do is influenced by emotional comfort, attachment, and fear of loss. People often stay in situations that harm them simply because those situations feel familiar. The mind prefers familiarity over uncertainty, even if familiarity is painful. This is why individuals remain in toxic relationships, repetitive cycles, or unhealthy environments far longer than logic would allow. The brain is not always seeking happiness. It is seeking emotional stability, even if that stability is built on suffering. This contradiction is one of the deepest psychological patterns in human behavior. We often choose what we know over what is good for us. There is also a hidden psychological force that governs human interaction: validation. Every human wants to feel seen, valued, and acknowledged. This need is natural, but when it becomes excessive, it begins to control behavior. People begin to compare themselves with others, compete silently, and measure their worth through external recognition. When validation is missing, insecurity grows. When others succeed, comparison increases. When attention is lost, emotional imbalance appears. Most conflicts between people are not purely logical disagreements. They are emotional reactions to perceived imbalance in respect, attention, or importance. Humans are constantly evaluating their place in social and emotional hierarchies, even when they are not consciously aware of it. Another deeply unsettling truth is how easily perception can be distorted. Human beings do not experience reality directly. They experience interpreted reality. Every situation passes through emotional filters, past experiences, and psychological biases. This means that two people can live through the exact same moment and walk away with completely different versions of the truth. This is why misunderstandings are so common in relationships, friendships, and even families. People do not always respond to what actually happened. They respond to what they believe happened. And belief, once formed emotionally, often becomes stronger than fact itself. This is where many conflicts begin, not in reality, but in interpretation. Perhaps one of the most uncomfortable aspects of human nature is emotional inconsistency. People are not fixed in their feelings. Emotions shift based on circumstances, internal mental states, external influence, and time. Someone who deeply cares today may feel distant tomorrow, not necessarily due to dishonesty, but due to emotional fluctuation. This does not mean relationships lack value. It means emotional states are not permanent. Human attachment is dynamic, not static. And when people expect emotional permanence from temporary feelings, disappointment becomes inevitable. This is one of the silent realities of human connection that most people struggle to accept. At a deeper level, self-awareness is one of the rarest qualities in human behavior. Most individuals believe they understand themselves clearly, but much of human action is automatic, reactive, and unconscious. People often justify their emotions after reacting instead of understanding them before responding. True self-awareness requires confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself. Fear, insecurity, ego, jealousy, and emotional dependency. But most people avoid this reflection because it demands honesty that can be emotionally painful. It is easier to analyze others than to analyze oneself. That is why human nature remains misunderstood, not because it is hidden, but because it is rarely observed objectively. Despite all of this, understanding the darker side of human nature is not meant to create fear, cynicism, or distrust. It is meant to create clarity. Because once you understand how people actually operate emotionally and psychologically, you stop taking everything personally. You begin to see patterns instead of confusion, behavior instead of promises, and intention instead of words alone. Awareness does not make you cold. It makes you conscious. And consciousness is the foundation of emotional intelligence. When you stop expecting people to behave perfectly and start understanding why they behave the way they do, your entire emotional world changes. You become less reactive and more observant. You no longer collapse emotionally when someone disappoints you because you recognize that human inconsistency is part of nature, not necessarily personal attack. This shift is powerful because it gives you control over your internal state. You stop being controlled by emotional chaos and start responding from awareness instead of reaction. There is also a psychological transformation that happens when awareness increases. You begin to recognize manipulation more clearly, emotional patterns more quickly, and behavioral inconsistencies more accurately. This does not make you superior. It makes you more grounded in reality. You no longer rely solely on words. You rely on patterns. You no longer depend solely on emotion. You depend on observation. And this balance between emotion and awareness is what creates emotional maturity. So when we talk about the dark side of human nature, we are not talking about something evil or external. We are talking about something deeply human, something that exists in all of us to different degrees. Ego, emotion, insecurity, validation, perception, and inconsistency are not flaws to be judged. They are patterns to be understood. Because once you understand these patterns, you stop being controlled by confusion and start operating from clarity. You stop expecting perfection from imperfect beings. You stop attaching blindly to temporary emotions. And you start seeing life as it truly is, a complex system of emotional psychology rather than simple intentions. And here's the final truth. The moment you understand human nature deeply, you gain something most people never develop in their entire life: emotional freedom. Because you are no longer reacting to illusions, you are responding to reality. And that changes everything. If this message made you reflect differently, don't ignore that feeling. Subscribe now, because this space is dedicated to deep psychological truth, emotional intelligence, and real human understanding, not surface-level motivation. Here, we don't just talk about life. We help you understand it. And once you understand it, you begin to master it.